Climate change is actually one of the key issues of discussion nowadays. It's a phenomenon that has to do with the changing climatic conditions of a place. And in this case, we're not only talking about what's happening in one particular place, is we are taking a generality of the global environment. Globally, we come to see that the climate of the world is actually changing. Not changing as such, it's actually warming. So it has a lot to do with what they call as global warming. And then the global warming gives rise to what we call as the climate change, where most of the parameters that tell us about climate normally change their normal course. For example, people get to know that rainfall is changing over time. The nature of rainfall that you're receiving is changing over time. The temperature is changing, the wind direction is changing, the wind velocity is changing, the pressure is atmospheric pressure, everything changing. So all those elements are actually changing. And whenever they change, normally people note this. And what is most important is to note that our lives are actually dictated by the climate. Whatever climatic condition you're in, it dictates what you can do and what you cannot do. So the moment you have changes in those, certainly they get to affect your way of life. The main causes, I think we might talk about two different causes generally. We can call out what we call as the natural change, like what we may call as that is designed by the Almighty, that the change might happen. And then the other one is the man-made, what some people might call the anthropogenic changes. Our activities, like some of the waste we generate, especially waste in terms of carbon or carbon equivalent that we generate and we release into the atmosphere. Let me give you an instance of cases of major industrial outfits. For example, if you have an industrial production site and you release so much of carbon into the atmosphere, that carbon, what most people might call the carbon dioxide, for example, or what you see, sometimes we see that as smoke. When you see a lot of smoke coming out from a particular exhaust, and that is normally released into the atmosphere, that gets to affect the quantity of the carbon that is in the air. And where you have lots of this, you have many industrial production, you have many transportation vehicles, for example, your cars, your motorbikes, even the aeroplanes, and many of those kind of automobiles, you burn your waste, for example, from the what we call generally as boiler. You burn the waste and you generate so much smoke. You burn the bushes and you generate so much smoke. All of this get into the atmosphere. And one thing is the atmosphere, the global atmosphere is one. You do not have different atmospheres for different countries or different regions of the world. You have just one atmosphere where the carbon that is generated in Germany or in the United States or in any parts of Europe or any parts of the world is actually going into the same atmosphere. So that is the major cause of global warming. And that warms up the globe. And as we warm up the globe, it actually does not allow for the energy to escape into the atmosphere, because it accounts of block the release of warmth outside into the atmosphere. No, it doesn't go beyond the atmosphere, and that is what keeps warming. And if it's like you have a house and you block everywhere. Look at, you have windows that possibly might be of glasses. When the sun rises, the incoming radiation, the solar rays, can penetrate through the glasses and it warms up your house. But the problem is that rays doesn't have the capacity to also penetrate to go out. And that is why when it is in the afternoon time, the warm atmosphere, the warm air that comes into your room normally gets to be held in your room. And that is why your room is warm all the time. So all the things that happen in your room now gets to reflect that warmth. Now that we are talking, I've given you the example of a room, taking that this is the entire world. You have your earth, and everything that comes into the earth is stored. Every energy is stored, and it becomes a big atmosphere, and the atmosphere gets warmed up, and that is what will keep the winds. The winds will blow differently. The water, the moisture, the pressure, almost everything is affected, and that is what will keep changing. Some of the agricultural products also release some greenhouse gases. For example, if you have a very big rice field, they do release some greenhouse gases. And the methane gas that we see, some of us are aware of what they call as the methane gas, is actually released from the farms. And so it can also cause. And of course, some of us use a lot of chemical fertilizers. They also have a way to warm up, and they also release carbon. And for that, agricultural activities also release carbon into the atmosphere. Agricultural production is all about the incoming rain, where the rain is affected. That certainly it's about the rain, it's about the humidity, it's about the dryness, it's about how much sun is received. So all of this affect your agricultural production. Sometimes farmers, you will see they will be looking for warmth. If it is too cold, some of the produce will not do. If they are too hot, some of the products, if it is rainy, if it is not raining, if it is windy, all of these are affecting the agricultural production. And that is how you see climate change has impact on all the agricultural production system, because it affects especially the rainfall. It affects also the temperature. So these two key elements of weather and climate, when they are affected, certainly the entire system is affected. Mitigation is always a big issue. Because for you to mitigate, it means most of this production we are saying, you should either change your way of production or stop even production. And certainly human being, you can't tell people not to go into industrialization. So that is how, instead of putting so much pressure on mitigation, we are saying get adapted to it. So getting adapted to climate change is, okay, the climate is of this nature, change the crop types, change the seed, change your way of life, change most of the things there is easy for you to change those things than for you to say, okay, we are mitigating. Meaning you are getting adapted to. rather than mitigating. You hardly can mitigate, but you can get adapted to it. The same way it affects human is the same way animals are living systems, and for which, if you know that when it's raining, sometimes some animals do not like a lot of rain, it affects them. When it is dry, sometimes some animals do not like a lot of dryness. When it is windy, sometimes some animals do not like when it is windy. So most of these things, all creatures, they have their own environment. So when the environment is affected, and sometimes come to think about the food they eat, sometimes because of the climate in one particular region, the animals will not find it conducive to survive in that environment. They will have to move away from the environment. If it is the tiniest kind of animals, the flies that you see, sometimes some flies cannot survive in some climatic conditions. They can survive best in some other climatic conditions. So when the climate changes, certainly the fly, because you have changed their habitat, I think that's what scientists are calling the habitat. You have changed their habitat, certainly they also would have to change. The climate change, most of us in the third world, we have just spoken about the climate change, and you can see that most of us in the third world actually are most vulnerable to the effect of climate change, because our rainfalls are always affected, the winds are affected, the temperature is affected. Almost every element of climate is affected. And the Western world is always better prepared. Most of us in developing countries, you will come to see that when it is raining, it may rain heavily, and it causes a lot of flooding, and the flooding affects our livelihood. When it is so dry, it also affects our livelihood, because we cannot produce the sort of food we are used to, so we get affected. When it is windy, the winds are so strong in developing countries, and for which they affect even our housing. When the pressure is less, it affects the wind flow, and many things are affected. So these are some of the ways by which they affect, and for which certainly those of us in Africa and other third world countries are actually most affected by climate change, and for which, and we don't actually contribute most to it. The Western world does most of the contribution. Of course, we are taking the effect most. And I think that is what is bad for us. In northern Nigeria, unfortunately, we are not doing much. One, we are always aware that carbon has a way by which it can be taken off the atmosphere. If you produce a lot of trees, if you plant a lot of trees, it will take away the carbon. So in northern Nigeria, we are supposed to be doing that. If we plant so many trees, the trees normally takes away the carbon and it gives us oxygen. I think we are aware of the interchange.
Yes.
So, but we don't produce so much of it. We cut down trees instead. We burn the trees. That is what we are taking as firewood. So we don't do as much. So in northern Nigeria, I think that is the most, because we don't produce much industrially. I mean, we don't do much. Our industrial outputs are almost non-existent, and for which it will be difficult for us to say that we are doing much. But this is one area where I feel we can. There are people who sat down and they invented They invented some. They invented some stoves, modern stoves. So, and I think some people in Nigeria have contributed to that. I know of some outfits for very young people who have done this, and they registered them even with the United Nations, and I think they are doing very well. So we have not been doing much, yet there are areas where we feel we can do a lot more. But it's important for us to know that the global climate is changing, and each and every one of us would have a way to contribute to either the adaptation or even the mitigation that we said is difficult. Even to mitigate, I think we have the capacity to, but it's difficult. We have a good policy in the country on climate change. In fact, let me tell you happily that in Nigeria, we have a department under the Federal Ministry of Environment that is specifically dealing with climate change issues. So the involvement of government is very strong. However, if you look at the what the government is specifically doing, I think that is where we may have some difficulties. Yes, we don't do much, but we have the, if you like, aspiration. The government always aspires to do a lot, but we are not doing as much as we seem to be wanting to do. So surely for most of Africa, and I think I'm happy recently, even currently, there's a big meeting that is happening in Kenya, and I know most of the African countries are making some presentations, and I know some Nigerians are also there. And every year we do attend the COP meetings, and even this year I think Nigeria is also going there. But unfortunately, I think we need to come back and begin to implement some of the policies. The government has done some good policies, but the implementation of the policies is not actually what we desire. In northern Nigeria, I think we are happy we have so much of the solar influx. And people are getting to say, okay, with the high cost of diesel, high cost of petrol, high cost of everything, I think they are getting to say, okay, solar is a big alternative and it's available and people are using it. Also, people are thinking of using the winds. Unfortunately, the winds are not as strong as we would want to use it all the time. So there are some of the key inventions that people are using, especially, for example, like the stove. Like I said to you, people are inventing some stoves that are modern, and people are using them. And I'm happy to tell you that in recent years, I think the last 2-3 years, you can see many families are getting to use the gas and the cooking gas. It's a very good alternative and people are using it. So we are at least leaving out the firewood. The firewood is now almost safe and people are using other alternatives.
Yes.
And I'm happy to say that with time, possibly very many of us will get conscious, the consciousness that we desire to have on people. That is the crisis that I always talk about when it comes to the implementation of policies. You know, the governments have done a policy and they are saying we are up for climate change adaptation strategies. But of course, when you come to real practice, you'll come to see that those policies are actually not properly implemented. Where you see government will say, okay, don't cut down trees, but they are making cost of petroleum resources very expensive. gas very expensive, even the cooking gas very expensive, diesel, all the other alternatives are expensive. I would be happy if Nigerian government would get to subsidize, especially some of these materials that you need if you want to utilize solar. So government should go into subsidize this. Government should go into subsidize the cooking gas. Government should get into do so many things, and in a way that would say, okay, these policies that we have, we are also going to implement them properly. I think there was a time that I know, I think that was a long time ago, over 10, 15 years ago, when NNPC had the plan to actually give out some of these, the initial, what you call as the initial investments. What they had wanted to give out the initial investments. Initially, they wanted to give people in the villages. We had to advise them that people in the villages will not use them. Bring them to, and then that's how it will go into people. But I'm happy now people are adopting them by themselves, only that, like you have observed, they are quite expensive. They are always going even beyond the affordability of the common man. Yes, I think I have said it in a way. I said, okay, we have abundance of some of the natural resources in terms of solar, for example. So if we get to look at the possibilities of harnessing the solar, that many people will get onto it, to use it, I think that would be very good. Another one is this idea of planting so much trees. Our cities are so bare. Unfortunately, sometimes you look at the environment in Europe and America, they have more luxurious trees than we do have in Africa. I think we need to we need to subsidize some of these domestic energy sources. We need to do a lot of subsidy, and I think it's important we think about some of these things and we begin to use them.